Thank you so much for having me. I didn't know it was a new segment. I feel so honored to have raised just in time for it. So this is great. So I was asked if I would talk about the story of our raise. So we just closed a $14 million Series A financing, which feels so awesome to say. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And the secret is that we did about $10 million in equity and $4 million in debt. But when you're a Canadian company and you want to put your press release next to the American companies, you make it as big as possible because we have to raise less because our cost is less. So that is the truth of the raise. And there's definitely someone filming this, so I'll get in trouble for saying that. My company's FinAI. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer. We're about 50 people. We're based all of about 200 meters this direction. We build virtual financial assistants for banks. And the reason that we decided to raise was because we realized that we hit this really beautiful business model and that we'd actually started to execute on it pretty nicely. So we work with banks across 4 continents today, some of the largest banks in the world. So we work with banks in South Africa and Germany and Canada and Nicaragua. Turns out all of the banks have the same problem where they've got this incredible amount of valuable data, some of the most valuable data imaginable, and they're working on how they can move up the value chain. And so we build assistants that leverage artificial intelligence to really use that data to help you better manage your financial well-being. And we do it with banks, so then we can reach a whole bunch of different people. And the mission for our company is to improve the financial lives of 100 million people by 2025. So it's this really awesome model where we get to help people, but also get to make some money in the process of doing it. So we decided to raise because we kind of hit this point where we realized we had traction and that we had a big enough market that there was interest in what we were doing. So our first step was to go to our board, and we have some of the best investors imaginable on our board, Yaletown and Flying Fish. If you ever have the opportunity to work with either of them, I cannot say enough nice things about them. We decided that we were going to do this really quick and easy internal $10 million round, and we were kind of starting to get into due diligence. If you've ever done it before, it's typically a 3-month process where you speak to customers and you put together this really impressive data room and you have all these beautiful financial models and a whole bunch of stuff that takes forever to do. And right when we were at the beginning, this other group came in and said, hey, we're really interested. Would you guys let us into the round? Like, yeah, it's a really nice compliment. Sure. So kind of went through 3 months, spent a whole bunch of time doing it, everything closed, legals were signed, it was beautiful, and it was just that easy. Except nothing is ever that easy when you're running a startup. So one day I was sitting in the boardroom and counting my lucky stars for just having closed the best and simplest Series A imaginable, when my business partner walked in with what was probably the whitest face I've ever seen him have in his entire life. And he said, our lead investor, this other group that wanted to come in at the last minute, they just bailed. I was like, what do you mean they just bailed? We just built a whole round and financing around them. We've signed legal documents. We've done 3 months of due diligence. Like, we're expecting cash in bank in less than 14 days. He's like, they've had an internal issue, nothing to do with anything that we controlled, but our round just fell apart. And I think it's what officially is called a black swan event in the startup world. So we sat there in silence for 5 minutes, and then we went out for lunch and sat in silence at lunch for an hour. And then we walked back into the office, and we looked at each other, and we said, smile. And we walked back into the office and went on with our day and rallied kind of the board and tried to figure out what we do next. And events like this are so important because there is nothing that is more valuable in the startup world than relationships, and relationships that help you out on bad days. So we leveraged our network, we reached out to everyone, and we managed to pull back around together, find 2 new external investors in the span of 3 weeks, and managed to pull it back together. So we did it, we pulled it off, but man, was that ever a tough thing to do. Someone put together some questions for me before, and my favorite question in what to cover was, how did you feel after it was done? And my reaction when it finished was one reaction that I was not expecting at all. I got an email saying cash is in bank when I just got on a plane. I was flying back from Austin from a conference. And I spent the next 3 hours with the poor soul next to me in tears. And it was the tears of 4 years of hundreds of meetings where people say, you're not going to be able to do it, and this is a terrible idea, and why did you quit your really awesome job to do this crazy startup idea, and all the things that go with it. And we had lots and lots of good days, but it was all of that came back, and I had this plane ride of about 3 hours where I sat there and cried and let it all go for all of that part. And I guess the main lesson that I learned from it, and that I hope that I can impart on those who are earlier in the journey than I am is that it's worth it. It's totally, totally worth it, and it is a roller coaster ride, and it is really difficult, and it takes a whole bunch of guts and courage, and whatever that graph was with things going all the different way. But man, does it feel good when you reach those milestones. So for those who are still in it, go for it. I hope that you guys are very, very successful, and certainly happy to champion any other company along the way as much as I can. Thank you very much.
So that story right there is why I love everything, Nat, that you do and FinAI does. Absolutely incredible. Any questions there? We got one or two questions. You guys are really making me run today. Wow. I'm going to jump over there.
So you mentioned that there was a point that you had to transition from your awesome job to working on the startup. And as somebody that's probably going to have to do that at some point, how did it feel? What was that trigger that made you quit your job and continue with the startup? And how did it feel when you had to start working with no income and all that and just doing the overall transition?
Yeah. I mean, you really have to lose your ego. So my background's with the United Nations. I had a really comfy job in Geneva. It was really great. I decided to go and do an MBA, so I had a little bit of a natural break because I went back to school, moved back to Vancouver, spent 4 months trying to figure out how I transitioned my job, couldn't really figure out how to make that work. And a friend called and said, do you want to do this business with me? I think it's kind of interesting. And I said, sure, if you want to move here. He's an Australian guy, but we met in Spain where I did the MBA. But 3 weeks later, he showed up to Vancouver, never having been here before, and the two of us, he was formerly a management consultant, we moved in with my mom. So I was 30-something, I had just left my job at the UN, and my business partner, who was a friend of mine, but we weren't great friends in the MBA, and I moved in with my mom, and that's a really tough conversation to have with friends over beer, to be yeah, no, I moved home, I moved in with my mom, and doing this stuff. So, yeah, that's why I cried for 3 hours when I raised the Series A. So, yeah, it sucks, and that's what you have to do, and it's super brutal, but, I think that you get rewarded for the risk. And even if the company doesn't work out, I think I always would have wondered what if I hadn't done it. So I think it's worth it, but man, you got to swallow some pride for sure.
Yeah. We got a question up here. Kabir.
Hi, this is Kunal here. I had a quick question on how do you see the transition of putting your own money in, bootstrapping, and then moving towards external investment?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the business model. So actually I have 2 siblings. We all have our own companies, and we've all done them a little bit differently. There's days when I'm really jealous of my sister who's bootstrapped her company and doesn't have any external investors and only responds to herself. And that's just her decision. She'll never grow as quickly as our company can, but she gets to take all the summer off. So I don't know, something to be said for that. So I think you really have to think about what's the strategy of the business? Certain types of financing serve certain types of business models. And 2, what's your risk appetite as an entrepreneur? And do you want to be able to grow quickly and then you take on investors, or are you willing really to bootstrap and to really make it work as long as you can go? So you kind of have to one at your values and 2 at what your business model is. But I think they work really well for different situations.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I'll take that one there.